What in God's name is that from Thorin?
I'm going to be answering questions from those who donate, I think it's at least $10 to my Patreon, as I do in theory every month, but due to my heavy event workload towards the end of last year, I actually got behind on these. So I'm going to be doing this one now. There'll be another one coming out within a week, and we'll actually make it so that over the next couple of months, we'll double up on these video AMAs. And I will actually even reach out to some, because I have a database of all this stuff on Patreon. I'll reach out to some of the patrons who are no longer patrons, but were patrons during the period where they would have had the opportunity to ask questions. So don't worry, everyone will get a chance to in the end. So we'll start out here. Impulsive asks, in fact, maybe I'll make these into questions and put them on the screen in the future. I'm not sure. Impulsive says, you have a couple of times talked about the artist Burial and called him one of the best of all time. Could you talk a little bit about why you think that presumably is, and what in his music draws you in? Right. One of the reasons why I actually think legitimately one of the most worthless forms of like meta art is reviews of movies and music and stuff like that, because typically the only real way they serve a purpose is if you know really, really well the person doing the reviews, and therefore based on that you might get a sense of like, do I have similar tastes to him? Did I like things that he described in a similar manner? Their actual review means very little because it's so incredibly subjective. Doesn't tend to tell you too much about the thing itself as opposed to their perception of that thing. So I will say I'm not some like Anthony Fantano guy who's going to go and wax lyrical for 20 minutes about this, but I also personally am not particularly interested in people like that, because it's not really that interesting for someone to just throw a bunch of adjectives out there about music that I might experience very differently. You know, it's very different from us both watching the same player and describing his style or his strengths. You know, this is a lot more subjective as to what people like. So there's not a whole lot I can probably say here. What I'll say is this. Like, first of all, I've been for a long, long time now. Off the top of my head, with drum and bass, I think I would say I go back to about, talking like 2003 maybe. So solid like 1.5 decades worth of drum and bass experience there. More electronic, wider electronic music, electronica, that sort of stuff. What people used to naively call techno in America for a long time. Probably goes back even further. You could maybe add another, what do you think for that? Maybe another 7-8 years on that one. So we're talking like 20 plus years within the field of electronic music. I've always been interested in that type of music anyway. And one of the key things I think about that sort of music is because like dance aspects of electronic music especially tend to have sounds which are computer generated, even if they're from things that had like, in theory, like physical instruments like synths in the past, that aren't as common in traditional music or aren't as widely recognized. And as a result, you have to kind of build your palette up before you can really get into some of this other music, in my opinion. Otherwise, that's why when people hear certain tracks from a drum and bass, etc., if they're not used to that pace, that tempo, if they're not used to hearing an almond break, if they're not used to hearing certain drums repeated over and over again, they're going to have a hard time even being able to appreciate the melody or what you've done with the music or what's clever about the creativity involved. So I would say as a result, that's why typically I don't tend to go and recommend a lot of electronic music to people, because I myself, if I'd have heard that as my first album in the genre, might not only be able to get it, I might not have been keyed into it. So the reason I say all this up front is because I was someone who coming in who was essentially primed to at least be able to listen to music like Burial right off the bat, because a lot of his earlier stuff was a lot more sparse. A lot of it did have its background in what was basically the movement that became dubstep, but / garage. But realistically, that's why they made they renamed that genre Future Garage to fit the kind of Burial, Volor, those sorts of people within that kind of a subgenre. So I already was primed. His first album I wasn't like a huge fan of. The second album, Untrue, was where it all went next level for me, because that's where he really went heavily on the pitch shifting and made it a lot more melodic. And so it was unlike anything else in the genre at the time. I can't think of anything else even in electronic that was that close. A lot of people have tried to ape his style since. And I have to say, actually, compared to a lot of the, I would consider them like borderline genius artists like Aphex Twin, Boards of Canada, compared to those people who tend to be very difficult to ape. Like Boards of Canada, you can get vaguely within the same like feel, but it's quite hard to make it similar style. Actually, to be fair, a lot of people have successfully emulated the Untrue era of Burial quite a lot. Actually, that's basically what people like Volov, Flex have made their entire fucking career off, as far as I can tell. Now, they do a very good job of it, and they've got their own twist on it, but they have been able to do it, interestingly enough. I think probably it's a factor that, first of all, Burial's music, due to how it's made, is very unusual. It's not made with the latest tech. And so I think actually it naturally, as a result, has sort of, well, funnily enough, people like Boards of Canada would put these markers in to make it sound older or more like janky and a bit simplistic and a bit cut up and stuff. I think that's actually just a byproduct of how Burial creates the music. It doesn't seem like he tries to do it in more of like a straight lines and copying aspects of it. There's a lot more like almost human analog elements in making the digital music. So for me, the most interesting thing is that he started off as someone doing this very sparse sort of future garage. It very much was within the garage subgenre. But then what he later became, particularly around the era when he started making EPs with the like 3 tracks on, that's probably my favorite era of Burial going up until now. I haven't liked some of the more super dark ambient ones more recently, but I liked, for example, the unreleased track Only One with Charles Webster most recently. Like, what I think is fantastic is he's gotten into this place where he makes these songs that are basically a bunch of different tracks but all melded together. And then in theory, if you were making an album, you'd probably chop them up into separate tracks. But it means that these different movements, some of them do share themes. And it means that within the track, it's almost like a drum and bass mix. You can go all over the place from totally different like subgenres, switching between different atmospheres, switching between. And what I like is not only can he do very good garage / dubstep type, beats that have like a harshness to it and a dark theme to it, but one of the things that Burial's probably the most underrated for people who don't know his genre of music is he makes absolutely incredible, like sort of transcendent moments in music where he does pitch shift, say, a male voice into a female one to create a different kind of like choir in the background singing, or to make the words that are said in it, which oftentimes, funnily enough, are just samples from like cheesy R&B tracks, but he can make them have a totally different meaning when he pitch shifts them and then puts them against the sort of moody, almost dystopian background that his atmospheres create. So I think actually, funnily enough, he's moved more recently in the ambient direction. And even though a lot of people who were into his earlier stuff don't seem to like that, I personally am loving it because I always like ambient music anyway. And I think he's doing an amazing job with those like little flares, the little frissons, the elements that sort of, more than just sounding good, they actually resonate on some emotional level or bring forwards like timbers of nostalgia or something like that. Funnily enough, like the Boards of Canada example, nostalgia for something you never actually experienced. So can be quite interesting in that sense. So I think it's actually more the atmosphere of Burial than just having cool sounds or liking the programming or something. So Spoonfed89 says, on multiple occasions, you have said that you believe North and Optic need to shuffle into a single team. What would your version of that team be? What would that team be possible? Would that team be possible given the politics among the players? Right. Again, what I should point out here is this is obviously catching up on some questions from a few months back. I've deleted the questions that didn't make any sense at all. And any others, we're either going to update them to now or we're going to tweak them a bit so we can make them work. So this one's still fine. Now, this question actually did come before, as far as I know, Gade and Nico had swapped between the teams. But even so, we'll take that into consideration because I still do think it's the same case that North and Optic just don't work and that you could clearly make a good team out of them. The biggest problem is this. You said the politics aspect. You have to also consider the business angle. Like, if you're Optic, why are you going to give some of your best players to North and then you have the shitty end of what's left over from making another super team? If you're North, why are you going to give your players over to Optic and give yourself the shitty end? You can see the problem there is you're going to have to get a transfer that the other team thinks is in some way a good transfer for them, or you're going to have to spend mega bucks or wait until the end of people's contracts, like Cajun's is supposedly coming up soon, and you can directly sign the players that way. Because my big problem with this is, again, I never make lineups that are just, here's the 5 best players, let's see what happens. I try to make lineups that I think would work. So what's interesting is obviously we don't have MSL in this equation anymore. And I think that is actually part of the problem. It's because within the Danish scene, after Glaive, who do you want? Carrigan, right? So I'd personally say, we'll update this question by saying Carrigan's available, right? So let's say MSL's available as well. Personally, I think these two teams should have Carrigan and MSL as their in-game leaders. They're just the clear-cut best people for the job at the moment. Anyone else is going off potential or they haven't had the chance yet. Okay, if you want to gamble, go for it. I already know what Carrigan and MSL can bring to me. And they are on different levels, but their standard's pretty solid. So what I would try and do is make a super team out of one of them and then make an MSL team out of the other one. That's what I would personally try and do. So let's imagine I'm going to go ahead and guess out of the two teams, both have quite a lot of funding, both have now a half-decent track record over the last few years in esports, both are seemingly willing to make transfers, but I'll go ahead and say that North seems like the more stable money at the moment in terms of their backing for the football team. Optic had the whole infinite downsizing aspect. So let's imagine I'm making the North team into the best team, right? Well, of their lineup, I'm 100% keeping Valde. I think he's actually the best Danish player outside of Astralis. I think even in Astralis, he's better than some of those players. How could you say it, Thorin? I thought Astralis had 5 of the top 20 players of 2018. No, because that's not the way Counter-Strike or any fucking team game works. Get real. So, no, I do think Valde is better than some of the people in Astralis. I even think as soon as some of them slump, I would absolutely see a world in which he could play in that team. So, okay, I'm starting with Valde. He's got to be my initial starting point. And you know what? Since the odds on MSL coming back in the North soon don't seem that kind of realistic, I'm going to go ahead and put Carrigan as the in-game leader. So we've got Carrigan as my in-game leader, Valde as something of a star player. We'll see who else I pick up here. So obviously, I'd like to have Config, being as Config was there when MSL was there. I don't think that's a problem to have him with Carrigan. The North Org might not want him, but I think Config actually, for all people see with him being at times a bit cocky or doing a bit of trash talk, he actually seems like behind the scenes, he's a person you can reason with to some degree. So I think they could get him back on side. So let's go ahead and get Config in. I'm already liking my star players here. Config and Valde are players who could do some serious fucking damage. And who have I given them as an in-game leader? A guy who's an absolute monster at using individual talents. So that would already excite me a lot. So who do I want now to make up? You know, I typically tend to go with the triumvirate of stars, right? Unless you've got 2 god tier stars and I want to go more for like someone who's a more supportive element to make a really strong team player base. It's a Carrigan team. I'm not going that way. I'm going for another star player. So at this point in time, I'm picking who I want as the 3rd star, right? Do I want Yugi? Well, after seeing him in Optic, I definitely don't want him anywhere near this team. Do I want Cajun B? He can play that role pretty well. I'd certainly consider him for this one. I think he could be strong in this respect, as in not having to be a central point of the team. Remember, when he was over in Optic, he's looked good because he's ended up being the best or second best player some of the time, but he should never have been that in that role. He should have been able to do what he did there and then have Yugi perform, and he would have looked very good. So Cajun B is a solid choice. The other choice is, do I want to gamble on younger players? So do I want to go for a refresh? Not a bad choice. I don't think I haven't seen enough personally that I'd gamble on him in a team like this necessarily, but then again, I'd give the option to Carrigan. Do I want to go with Kirby and see if, like, here's the reason why I might go with Kirby. I could see a world in which, especially because I noticed in Optic, bizarrely, they didn't use Nico as the hard entry and then Config as the follow-up, which is the classic move from North that I assumed they would port over. In fact, why I assumed they'd even gotten Nico into the team, because he played hard entry in North. I would say this. In a world in which Config wants to run in first, I think I've found your entry duo with Kirby. I'd put Kirby on this team and I'd have Kirby and Config as a killer entry duo. And I would hope that that's going to be a crazy entry duo if you do it the right way with Carrigan directing them. So actually, with that sort of a team, it's already looking pretty fucking solid, right? Now, here's the problem, is since it's Carrigan, I can give you another, I could put Cajun as the last player here and say Carrigan could help work with him in certain ways. But the problem is I do think Cajun's the sort of person where I think he'll just retire before he lets himself get put in shit positions and be the worst player on the team. I don't think he wants to do that. So if I'm looking for someone who can fill in here, bearing in mind Carrigan's not going to be a big fragging in-game leader, right, now we're talking about people like, and no one's going to want to hear it, but AZ has shown a willingness to do that. I don't see why I wouldn't consider that, at least as a possibility. Who else is in the Danish scene we could consider picking up for this? They've already got Gade in North. I mean, the problem is he's playing sort of entry at the moment, so I guess that's scuppered that. And if I take Cajun, I guess I could have as an entry. It's not exactly a dream team at the moment, though, is it? Here's a thought that no one would think of, but why not have Snappy, but just tell him this, right? You and Carrigan are going to do it like this. Carrigan's going to call most of the time, but then you're going to, during games, think of like set strats that make more sense. Combined with the two of you, because remember, Snappy himself had his best results. If we go way back to when the team that became heroic was really strong, and very briefly was the best team in Denmark when they won that power LAN, he was actually the main caller, and then Glaive was his secondary caller. So maybe Snappy could actually work. I know that's going to sound crazy, because why would I pick Snappy? I think he's not a very good in-game leader overall, but as a secondary caller, hey, I reckon he could work as a supportive element. I've seen him make a lot of boneheaded plays, but if within this sort of team, if he understood, how his fucking bread was sliced, I feel like he maybe could do it. We run out of players otherwise for this sort of position. I don't know more players deeper in the Danish scene who could really play this spot. So that's my tough one for that one, unless I just go with a good player and hope they can fit the position. So I think I would go with that, which leaves who left over for Optic. Let's scoop up all the players that have some potential, shall we, and give them to MSL. So we'll say MSL in-game leader. We'll keep Yugi. Never seen him with MSL. I'd like to see what he'd do with him, actually. MSL always wanted a proper AWPer. There is one. The Mertz one didn't work out. Let's see if we can make Yugi work out. So we'll start with Yugi. Who have I left over that I haven't signed at this point in time? I guess Gade. So Gade has never actually played under MSL. Let's give him to MSL. Let's see if he can make him into a star entry like he's done with so many other players. AZ, Kirby, Config. So we've already got some solid talents. Let's put Refresh on this team, shall we? Let's give him another entry player. Let's see what he does with Refresh and Gade as entries. That's not a bad little lineup, right? As the last player, well, who's left? Either he can have his boy AZ from North if he's not available, or we'll give him Snappy. We'll put him in that scenario, or we'll take some other player who's less well known, more of a random. That's more of a budget team. We're going to need buyouts, and then this team's going to need to be willing to start over again. But I don't even think that's a bad lineup, actually. I think MSL will be the right in-game leader to bring these people up to a higher level. Right. Jerky's minion, my boy who's always hitting the top dollar. Of all the duelists, so he's talking about Quake here, that you have had in your reflections interviews, who do you think had the best mindset for it? Right, the problem here is obviously, and I'll say this for most questions like this, whenever you say best, I mean, really, you're just asking who I like the best in terms of their mindset. Like, in terms of best mindset, what I love about Duel is there's a lot of people who have absolutely varying and very different mindsets, but they all make sense for them, assuming they're successful players. I can see why they came to those conclusions, so for them, that is the best mindset. So, as a general topic, I would probably say I'm going to have to go with the big three obvious ones to me. Would be, because it has to be people I've done reflections interviews with, remember, so I can't pick like fucking Cooler or something. I've never done a reflections interview with him. So I'm going to have to say of the people I've done, it's going to be the people who to some degree were known for winning with their brains. So we're going to start with Rafa, because he has a fantastic mentality for how to play against people who are better than him and when he's at a disadvantage, which a lot of these other players didn't have to do. We're going to say Fatality, because his mindset for how to practice, how to get himself to peak, how to keep himself consistent, how to stay within his game, how to play to his own strengths, very, very good. One of the most consistent players I've ever seen in esports history. And then finally, I'll pick Thresh, because the guy was just so far ahead of the game in terms of how to think and how to control an opponent without ever having to make aim duels a case, that, again, I just thought he had a very special mind for the game, and I just wish he'd competed for a few years longer. They're the most obvious ones. Otherwise, there is other good people I've interviewed and people who definitely are up there. It's just that these ones stand out as being more special. Like, all of them had a very good sense for how to approach certain opponents, how to get themselves to the highest level. You notice they had very, very consistent results throughout their careers. At times were considered the number one dueler in the world in any esports game. So I think it's no coincidence that, funnily enough, none of these people are the most skilled. Of them all, Fatality would be by far and away the most individually skilled. And even then, except for a brief period in Q3 test, I don't think he was ever really a contender for like most skilled player in the world. People like Blue or CZM or Lakerman or C3 or, let me think, who else have we got? Prozac. You know, these sorts of players would have been considered much more skilled, 0-4, more skilled individual players. But there's a reason why this guy was a champion more so than most of those names. Right. Barbara Stanwyck's Legs says, another quick question here. A patron previously asked you if you considered the 2016 QuakeCon final, which was the one between Rafa and Evil, to be better than the IEM4 final, the one between Cooler and Rafa. Since you do not think so, where do you rank the former among Quake Live finals/matches, and which matches best contend with the latter for your esteem as the best Quake Live match in history? Right, the only downside to these sorts of questions, they're fun hypotheticals, so I know why people ask them, and certainly keep asking them. But I would say, if you can remember, when I do one of those threads that's like, hey, any suggested guests or topics, this will be a much better question to ask for one of those. Because if I did this as a written article, or even as a video where I link to the VODs, I'll go a lot more in depth and I'll really actually figure out what my number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is and figure out my criteria. as we're doing a Patreon question thing now, I'm basically just going to spitball some great matches I've seen and try off the top of my head to remember which the best ones were. So I still hold the IEM4 final the best in my mind for many reasons. It was the one that had not only very close games, but both players played at a very, very high level. Even though there were some fluky moments, they were kind of like winners make their own luck type fluke moments. I think the right player won the game overall. They managed to show amazing map pool and ability to play back and forth on the maps, even when it's the opponent's map pick. And anyone could have won this match on any of the games. So I think generally, and it's two of the best players to ever play Quake, and they were part of a legendary rivalry anyway. So I think it just has everything as a game for me. And it passes the eye test like a motherfucker for how exciting it is. So, and you could also make the point that maybe it changed the course of Quake Live duel history. Maybe Cooler would have gone on to be the dominant player with only Cypher to stop him if he'd have won this particular matchup. Who knows, right? A lot of the future matchups had similar seeds of it and were the continuation of that game within a game anime-esque rivalry that was formed pretty much from this match, even though they had previously played. In fact, they'd already played in the group stage of this tournament and Cooler won that one. So I would say the best matches to contend with it. The 2016 QuakeCon final was a very good one. My problem is it was so far at the end of the game, and some of those players, like for example Rafa, I think had already gotten into Overwatch at this point in time. It's hard to believe that those players are playing at full peak. I'd rather expect that they were out of shape a little bit. They played a little bit, like they played the Cups, and then they just got themselves back in shape for this LAN. So that's an issue in as much as we're not at the peak of like the field and talent for Quake, or even Quake Live in this particular setting. What else would be up there? I mean, obvious ones from the old school era of Quake Live. You've got to go ahead and immediately put like Cypher versus Cooler, QuakeCon 2010, because not least because this is actually a match where, no joke, the guy who lost the final could make a strong case that he should have or deserved, those very loaded terms. He's like the closest to someone who lost a game who should or deserved to have won the game, basically. Like, the way he played on Aero Walk was so exceptionally good that the idea he was beat by an even more exceptional, out-of-control performance, yeah, he probably should have won that one. What an amazing final generally. And the matches that Cooler did win, like the DM14 game, that is just absurd perfection. I mean, this is the sad thing. He played perhaps some of his best Quake Live in a series he lost. I think you've got to go ahead and add in... Let me think, what else would be a really good one? If we're going for Quake Live matches, off the top of my head, I seem to remember the series that was at the same IEM, actually. The semi-final between, I'm not going to say Cypher and Raf, I think I was a bit overrated, actually. The series between Avec and Cooler in the semi-finals. At the time, Avec was expected to beat him, had beaten him at the European finals, always had Cooler's number, beat him at DreamHack Winter. And so the way Cooler won, in like he really, you wouldn't believe he'd ever lost to Avec. He looked like he had the mental edge on Avec. He looked like he got on Avec's head. He looked like he was the very controlled one. He won that incredible DM6 game, which I've often pointed out has literally a moment that I consider almost to be a mystical experience for myself. An incredible moment where he does this crazy dodging when he's around the Mega and Avec's around the shotgun lower area. So I had that amazing game. Generally was just a fantastic match back and forth. That's another one that's got to be up there. What else are we looking at in Quake history? There was that MSI Beat It final at the end of 2010, the one that was played at DreamHack Winter, but it was before the DreamHack Winter tournament, where Rafa and Cooler played a great final, but then famously, like, Rafa and Cypher rather, but Cypher like forgot that the time limit was shorter or something and actually just lost the fucking tournament at the end of, I think it was Toxicity. No, was it Toxicity? I think it was. I think that was the map he lost on. So that was another great one. We didn't have that many God tier overall matches. Like, there was a lot of good matches, but a lot of them are going to be like quarterfinals and stuff. And generally it's specific players matching up. Like Rafa and Cooler matches generally are straight fire. You can go watch nearly all of those. There was a few online cups towards the end actually that had some fantastic matches, believe it or not. Like some of the matches where Cooler was able to beat Evil, because Evil, it looks like Evil's in advantage the whole game long, and then Cooler has to create godlike scenarios and then overcome Evil's aim, even with like weapon disadvantage or armor disadvantage, to win those games. So those were always fascinating for me towards the end of the game. I think just generally, those are some ones off the top of my head. Penguin off 9 says, Do you think that getting into the Asia Games cost more money than LOL had to spend and was another factor that broke the world's budget? Also, do you think that this move gave any positives to the esports world? For example, getting esports recognised as a sport so athletic visas can be given out. Right, bunch of questions there, and I will say that someone pointed out that actually there was many different games in the Asia Games, so it's very unlikely it was like League of Legends bust in that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, if I had to guess, I don't even know if it would be League of Legends paying to have directly in it. They might have paid some aspect of a license fee. Maybe it was shared with Kesper as well, or the TV channel. Like I think it was Africa maybe had the rights to it, which is why, funnily enough, they rage deleted all the VODs of YouTube apparently and had them copyright struck, etc. Like I could see that of costing them money, and if it was, I think it was fairly frivolous. Sure, I think it's more that Tencent just saw where the game was going and where the general market was, and said, right, let's tighten our belt and just cut some of our slack. I don't necessarily think it was necessarily League overspending directly, although in the past Riot has been known to do that, sure. In terms of the whole aspect of getting it recognised as a sport, not really, because like you've already seen, none of the things that have been done so far seem to have changed the visa aspect. Like, hasn't changed it in America, doesn't seem to have changed it from Eastern Europe much, doesn't seem, quite frankly, going to China, it's not a problem getting visas anywhere. What you have to do there is just show that it's all above board and they just give you the visa. Like, you don't intend to do a physical interview, unlike the million questions they ask for the US and then grilling you at the fucking border even when you got the visa. It's actually a lot easier to get into China. Once you apply and get the visa and all your paperwork checks out, you just fucking go and the guy looks at it and then you go through. Like, I actually think it's America that's the biggest problem getting visas for places, or getting people work visas to play in the LEC in Germany, because Germany doesn't acknowledge it as a sport. So it's maybe a step along the way one day to getting better athletic visas, but I think we're still far from that. Plus, I don't particularly think that the Olympics or the Asian Games are going to add much to esports. I think it might help those competitions have a little bit of youth interest. And certainly I liked the idea that they're trying to push for in Korea, that in the future, if you compete and potentially win a gold medal for Korea, that this might let you have to forego your... This might mean you can forego your military service and not do that, because obviously that's one thing that, even though once you're like 28 or 29, you're probably not a top player anymore. In theory, in the future, there might be elite players at that level, and I would hope they don't get their careers cut short as they currently do in South Korea. So I'll just say I thought it was worth answering that anyway, even though ultimately I don't think it's that relevant a question. Chung Young Xiang says, what books influenced you the most? Again, great AMA question for a written AMA, because I can go all day long and give you them there. So what I'm going to do is this, just like with the Quick Live one, let's see which ones I can remember, right? Because if I can't remember them, could they have influenced me that much? I mean, yes, but debatable in this context. So I'll even pick a more recent one. So one I read in the last couple of years was a book called The Outsider by Colin Wilson. Not to be confused with The Outsider, often translated as The Stranger, by Albert Camus. Now, this is a book which is actually a book about existential philosophy, but don't be put off by what I just said, because the key thing is, this is a guy who writes in one of the easiest fashions to read I've ever seen. This is a book that's a pleasure to read. You're not tripping over complicated terms. He's not trying to write in a very flowery manner. He's writing in a very matter-of-fact way. He even creates concepts and terms, like relabels them in a way that makes them like more easier to understand, doesn't make them like highfalutin and very complicated terminology. More importantly, it's got a lot of references to literature, poetry that you're not going to have read, but crucially, he summarizes it. So what's great is this guy goes out there and reads Camus and Sartre and a bazillion other people, and then Dostoevsky, and basically tells you the essential point he's taking from their works. You don't have to have read those works. It's even a great primer for some of those works, actually, because it's someone who's read them and seems to have a good grasp on them, and has then integrated some of the philosophical points into his own work. So he's someone where, if you get into this book, this is the book to read, like the must read. After that, he wrote a lot of other books, a lot of them very good. I haven't read all of them myself. I started reading a few currently, but all the ones I've read so far had some quality to them, and they also have that same quality of being very readable. So there's one immediately. I also think in terms of how it helped model, because the premise of the book is, why did so many brilliant men of the 19th and earlier 20th century commit suicide or become very depressed, even though in their work they found transcendent moments of beauty and joy and awe, which would make you think that actually understanding that about the world, they'd be the least likely person to get depressed or to kill themselves, right? So it explores why that is and comes to some very interesting conclusions using philosophical grounding and underpinning. So I think that was a very cool book, changed the way I thought about kind of certain aspects of what people need in life, to succeed and to drive them and to keep them interested and keep them from falling into potentially, obviously not a clinical depression. That's an entire topic that no one wants to talk about, because sadly people who are depressed then get really upset at you and start trying to hurt you in your career. So let's talk now about a couple of other books. I'll give you two more, shall I? So I will say that one book, I've mentioned it many times in the past, that was very influential on me when I was very young, was the book Hackers by Stephen Levy. And this is hackers in the sense of people who are computer programmers, not people breaking into computer systems in the 90s. This is more actually from sort of the 60s to the 80s in terms of the golden age of like computing, of programming, of personal computers coming on the market. And my favorite parts of the book are the parts that take place at MIT, where people are working on the PDP computers and they're programming on these massive computers that actually have terrible specs compared to now. And basically you have to become a very high level programmer to be able to do anything with these. So the sorts of people who do this, it's no surprise I'm interested in esports, right? They're very intense, very focused young men who are very brilliant in certain ways, very flawed, very limited socialized people in other senses. But obviously as a youth myself, I was able to relate to this. Funnily enough, I took the wrong message from the book initially, in as much as I thought, haha, computer programming is the thing for me. And then I went into computer science, it was boring as fuck. Whereas actually the real lesson to take away from it is find something that you're passionate about. Find some craft that you can dedicate yourself to and get amazing at, and therefore be able to create amazing things yourself. Therefore, that's how you take the inspiration. You don't make the mistake of seeing someone point to a beautiful moon and going, I will become the next moon. It's like, no, try and be something that people can admire or look to or gain light from in that sense. So what would be another one? Well, there's two. Let's go with the third one. We'll go with a fiction one now. We've got our fiction here. So I always give this one personally. It's the fourth book in the Dune original series, which is God Emperor of Dune. And the reason why I picked this one, you could read it on its own, you just won't appreciate it as much if you don't get the context of the three books before it. And each of the three books before it is almost a different genre. It's very good. I've done a whole thing on this on my second channel. But by reading them, you will understand certain philosophical concepts which are then expounded on further in the fourth book. Because basically, the fourth book is a character who I won't give many spoilers away, but they have a very long-term perspective on history. And when they then espouse philosophical concepts or principles or attempt to make idioms and axioms of history and politics and religion and human thought and development and evolution, they seem very, very wise. Now, obviously, the author wasn't like that, but funnily enough, as someone with some psychedelic background and who had a lot of interests in his own realm, clearly had looked into the Middle East conflict and oil, etc. So you get some very interesting sort of conclusions or spitballed ideas on philosophy, on human history, on how we think, how we structure hierarchies, what the nature of power is, what does it mean to be a tyrant, how do we control people, how do we give people the freedom of choice, what is the illusion of free will. There are so many deep topics that are put into a fictional narrative structure, and then as a story it's brilliant, but I think it's the more transcendent qualities that to me were very, very interesting. So those are three of the big ones I'll give you for right now. Now, someone just called Mark says, what advice would you give to someone who is looking to work in esports, Counter-Strike specifically, as a journalist? So aside from the basic advice I always give people, don't do it. Because if you're the sort of person who could be put off by that and you go, I got discouraged, I don't think you'll make it, quite frankly. Like, this industry will chew you up and spit you out, and you'll just be someone 6 months from now or a year from now crying about how you wasted your time, you didn't get paid enough, you were entitled to more, like people just gave you a bum deal, like you didn't get the breaks, people didn't upvote you. If there's one thing I hate, it's listening to people fucking whine. I do enough whining myself, and my whining's 10 times better than yours. My wine's like the finest fucking chateau, whatever the fuck you fucks drink out of wine that's been in there for 20 years. Your wine's like some shit out of box cooler wine. Like, I'm not digging it, mate. So I will say this, beyond the obvious initial one like that, I then would say things like, first of all, hustle. Produce a lot, because the more mistakes you make, assuming you're someone who's working to improve, the faster you'll improve. It's not a case that you go slow because you're trying to get every piece perfect. No, go fast at the beginning, because guess what? People aren't going to upvote the early pieces. People aren't going to read your early pieces. No one's going to give a fuck about the early pieces. But by making your mistakes in, first of all, technical writing aspects early on, you're going to improve that a lot. In terms of having shit ideas and people, a few maybe close friends being able to say that wasn't a very good idea actually, or give you pointers, or if you're very lucky, someone in the industry notice, You want to make all your mistakes early before people know you. Then you've got to really hustle. And here's the key aspect that most journalists fail with: scale it up. So if you can get someone to pay you $10 an article, $20 an article, right, time to do 20 articles in a month, time to do 15 articles in a month, scale it up, make yourself a little bit of cash, right? If you just want to go, yeah, but I should be paid 100 per article. First of all, you probably don't know the industry. And secondly, even 100, well, if you're so lazy, you only do 2 pieces a month, you're only going to get $200, right? So those are the few key things, because basically you want to be someone who's good at what they do, works to improve, produces a lot, therefore you can deliver a lot when people ask a certain aspect of you. I'd also say something like, contribute a lot on Reddit so you can sharpen your argumentation skills, so that you can see what sort of answers people will give to you, and therefore you can already be self-critical and question yourself along those lines when you're constructing your ideas, when you're coming up with concepts, when you're crucially learn how to structure an article, learn how to structure a video. You say Counter-Strike specifically, but this all applies to every aspect of journalism anyway. If you want to go with Counter-Strike specifically, I would do something like, if you want a very quick tip, like a shortcut hack to doing this, I would say go and get your favorite player and watch 50 VODs of him, either get the demo and watch from his POV or watch a VOD on YouTube, watch 50 of them and write down notes as you go. And first of all, enhance your note-taking ability so that you get a nice system in place, and then generally figure out when, oh, I think I've noticed something. You watch 5 more VODs. Oh, no, that was just in that one VOD. Learn to look, what's the difference between a tendency? What's a specific movement? Then, now you've got all that background, well, there's probably not many people who watch 50 VODs of that player, mate. Now try and write an article about it. Write an article with some observations about his career. Write an article just about his career generally, using the iceberg method of Hemingway, and keep a lot of that under the surface, but know it anyway, so that you're writing in the right direction. And that would be a pretty cool way to get sort of a piece out there that no one else might have the edge on you for. Henry Claraday. Fucking hell, I should have gone quicker here. There's way more questions than I thought. Right, let's see. Henry Claraday says, you have often used the NBA, specifically players, teams and coaches, as analogous reference points when discussing topics within CS. Do you feel that Counter-Strike has an implicit similarity to basketball that lends itself to similar storylines and topics, or that comparisons to basketball could be a key to branching out to the esport to a wider audience? And then he asks, like, have I ever considered making basketball-specific content on Thorin's side? Right, so in terms of why I often use basketball references, first of all, it's just the sport that I had invested the most time into. As I've mentioned in the past to many people, for a solid 10 years, and back in the day on the internet where people, actually big companies, didn't always know how to find smaller torrent sites and shut them down, I was able to get a lot of NBA games, and crucially to watch a lot of NBA games. So I watched a lot of the meaningful games over like a 30-year span. So it's just the game I know the most. Therefore, since a bunch of people are going to know some things about the NBA, I give it as a reference point, because, and this is what people never get about reference points, is if you don't know the reference point, ignore it. But the point is, if someone knows the NBA and they only know a bit about CS, by making the NBA point, they can then take some of the points I have there and draw it back over in CS, apply it there and understand more about CS. Or if they understand a little about the NBA and a lot about CS, you can see how it would work vice versa. So I do also think, after watching a lot of sports, that in terms of individual play, basketball's the closest. I think strategically probably the NFL, but basketball's the closest in as much as an individual player in basketball can to some degree always get his. They can in Counter-Strike as well. Can probably play at a similar level. They can as well in Counter-Strike. 5-man team, again, similar concept. There's only one ball. Well, there's only one certain spot where you can necessarily, well, I guess that doesn't apply entirely, but generally you attack at one point on the map. Sure, 2 people can attack at once. Then again, you can have 2 players run it. You can pass the ball between each other. So I think it just has the most similarities overall. I think also positionally on CT side, just as with defense in basketball, it's more about the shape you give the opponent, not necessarily how you take a duel. It's more like, what do you give up? And crucially, do you want him to go into what you gave up? Or are you giving it up thinking that he won't because that's his weak spot and you're actually defending his strength? There's so much chess match that goes on when you play defensively against someone in that sense. And I think that shares similarities. I also think in terms of the roles, like just as in there's only one ball and you have to figure out how you're going to pass it around and who's going to get like the resources, basically the ball, the passes, and where in the hierarchy they fit, you're going to have to figure that out. Well, aside from Dota 2 where they have the farm priority, I'd say in Counter-Strike with our different roles, that's the closest, because certain players need space created for them. Certain players have to play roles where they're going to die more. Certain players get a benefit of a role created for them in the same way setting a screen for someone and then being able to take a shot makes it easier for them. I think generally it just had the most concepts that cross-applied in terms of like the individual aspects of the game generally. Now, in terms of whether or not I would branch out and make more videos on my side channel, I definitely would actually. That is something I would consider. I've done it already a few times, but it's more that, as I told you, last year was about setting up this Patreon and getting it going. I've got it fairly decently gone. My website is actually very close to being completed, and the podcast aspect, I already have in plan I already have in mind a good plan to do that. So that will come also in the near future, and there will be podcast versions of, in theory, most of my content. I don't know if it'll be all yet, because that might be a hassle. Maybe it can depend whether I can get someone to help me with it. But I have a plan in mind to make it, on the one hand, not wreck all my ad revenue, but also make it so that people who really want it, when they want to listen at the gym or something, can still listen to those episodes. But I'll tell you my plan for that when and as we get to that. Now, the pair says, could you contrast/compare, i.e. the type of player, skill and talent level of real Norwegian 1.6 CS player and simple? Right, so I'll give you the similarities. So similarities would be two very high skilled players. Real wasn't like as much of an outlier in that sense as simple as in CSGO, but certainly a very skilled player, one of the more skilled players, really nice aim, very naturalistic style of aim, lots of flicking, spraying, didn't ever seem to need as much technique as other people. They're also both prodigies at the game. I mean, they're Simple, someone who was doing amazing things at age 16 and already a very strong player. Real literally won a tournament with a number of the top European teams there when he was a 15-year-old as the star carry of the team in Team 9 Norway. So as a prodigy, they both have a similar track record. The problem is, Real only got to play, believe it or not, until he was something like 17 before he had like organizational issues, and then he was stuck with like the Norwegian scene not having as many good players, and then he started playing semi-pro, and then Swedish teams wouldn't take him in. Simple's had the option to go elsewhere. Simple's now had a couple of good teams. I think overall Simple's had generally more opportunity, even though in theory Real was in a top team for longer. It's a bit, you can kind of cut that one. Maybe it's a push in like the blackjack sense. The problem is Real never had everything going ham at age 18, 19, like Simple has had, to start getting ready to kick into God mode at age 20, 21, whatever it might be. So I really would have loved to have seen what Real could have done at that point in time. Maybe he could have done it. Obviously you can't say he would have, because it's such an outlier thing to do. I mean, you don't get players like that very often. So he wasn't quite on that level. He was the best Norwegian player skill-wise. He was a very good player, but he kind of never got to fulfill his career potential. Simple's already done a career trajectory no one's able to match, quite frankly. Elliot Horskaya says, can you give an update on finding an audio format for your videos? Yeah, I actually referred to that before. The basic format is what I'm going to do. Basically, I'll give you a spoiler here since you're my patrons, is I'm going to make it so that there's a podcast version, but there'll be a delay. So it'll be, I'll figure out basically what the sweet spot is so that most of the people who currently watch, and I get most of the ad rev from there, so it'll be a few days, they watch it, and then after a few days, say you're someone who wants to just stack up like, 10 old episodes of Counterpoints, or like the last 3 weeks of content, but you're someone who doesn't get to watch a lot of my content, I would hope you'd still click the video so I get the click, but either way, in theory, you'd just be residual income on that, wouldn't you? Just the odd pennies dripping in. So there will be MP3 versions you'll be able to download or get it from SoundCloud or whatever. And therefore, hopefully, it's not wrecking your phone battery and you can still listen. Because I know people do listen a lot on mobile. And in the future, if I get sponsors and I have a very stable sponsorship scenario, maybe I'll just take away the delay entirely and it'll be a day after or on the same day. It's going to be a bit more of an arse on though. And bearing in mind, I'm arsing on to literally give you a chance to not give me ad rev. I'm not really a huge fan of it as a concept, but I felt, whatever, fuck it. This is a happy enough compromise, right? If you're willing to wait a few days to listen to it without giving me any ad rev, you sound like a bit of a con, or you're just someone who only listens to MP3s, in which case, fair enough, I'm reaching someone I didn't reach before. So I feel like that's a happy compromise. There'll be more info still to come on that. I haven't given it all away yet. Mark Richardson says, your recent video about working in esports really struck a chord with me. I already earn a good living through writing, but I'd love to get involved in esports, CSGO specifically. In my region, I'm Australian. I know there's not a lot of money here, just want to get involved, whether it's writing, design or commentary. Right. I'm already worried, mate, by the way you started off as like, I want to be a writer. I already am a writer. This is already sounding great, right? And I want to write in my region, Australia. Sounding great. Not many Australian writers. And you know what? I don't even care about money. Bingo, I can get you the job tomorrow because it's not a job. You don't care about money. All you need is a website you can write for, Reddit and Twitter, right? So do you have those things? You have them all. What are you waiting for? You can do it without me. Why do you need me to tell you how to do it? You can go on medium.com and write an article there. You can make a twit longer that's an article. You can make an article on Reddit itself as a self-post. You can do this tomorrow, mate. And no one's going to read it because no one gives a fuck about Australian esports. You're not famous. You're not going to do that. And you're going to get paid a penny. But you said it wasn't about money, right? So that's the question. What worries me is that you immediately said whether it's writing, design, or commentary. I have no basis to know that you have any ability in design or commentary. So that sounds a lot, mate, like the woman, the waitress in LA who goes, I'm an actress, TV presenter, weather girl, singer. So at that point in time, you actually probably have none of those skills. You just want to be famous and have a job, right? So I would go ahead and say if you have no basis in commentary or design, you're probably not going to make it, mate. I mean, those are jobs that actually have a skill set and going to be more about competing against each other. I'd say go with the writing aspect, make a self-post on Reddit, make comments and make them longer, make a Medium post, submit it to Reddit, put things on Twitter and hope they get the attention of people who care about them. If they don't, well, it's not my fault they suck or no one cares. Get your own breaks. I'd say you can do it. It's just, I don't really know what the point would be. If it's for your own benefit, hey, go ahead, do it. Have a great time. Write about that scene as much as you want. Maybe you do a great job and people love it in Australia. I don't really see what the problem is, though. I mean, why do you need a job to do? Why can't you just start now? It's one of those... I'm not hating on it. It's just a weird question to me, right? Julia Mello says... What are your ideas for developing leaders in esports, especially with the majority of players being quite young? Do you think it can be taught, or is it just an innate quality in one's personality, e.g. NALCS, Bjergsen, Jensen, full of talent, but can't lead their teams as men? Where are those in the NA scene with the killer instinct and drive to succeed, while also instilling that mindset in their teammates, e.g. Faker, Mate and Korea? Right, the main issue here, as you alluded to, is just that the players are so young. If your average age of some players is going to be like 21, 22 on some teams, they aren't men. In fact, even the 22-year-old, because he spent half his fucking life playing video games, not outside socialising, probably is emotionally stunted and is more realistically, socially, like a 16-year-old, if anything. That would make a lot more sense for how the CSGO scene operates, right? So none of them are men, quite frankly. So they haven't learned... Men don't become... Men on one level might learn just by getting older because they have more chances to experience life, but also by going through life experiences they become men. The problem is, if you are a basketball player, all the time you're not at the practice facility, you're not playing basketball, you're living your life. So you actually gain life experience, you have a family, you have friends, you have a business, you see your industry you're in at the time, you're going to gain valuable experience that's going to let you become a key leader. It's very rare you get young leaders. In fact, I think it's a big flaw in sports where they have a young star player and they make him the captain too early, where he has the skills for it, but he doesn't have the mentality for it and he might not be respected. I think that is always a key mistake. They often do that, though, to encourage him to become a captain. That's often a move they do with like troublesome people who are like borderline. They think if we give him responsibility, he'll get rid of that. That can work, sure. So there's one aspect of it. You can give the people a responsibility. My issue here is I doubt it's innate anyway. Like, I don't really know. I mean, I guess there's some people who might be like chess masters innately. I would guess formative experiences make you into that person. I'd love to go and look into the history of High or something like that, or N-rated, and find out what made them the people they are. That would be an interesting topic, right? But I would imagine they had formative experiences, then they did the gig, then they got better at the gig, and then over time they became the best at the gig. So I think someone like Bjergsen to some degree can do some of it. It's just that as an individual player, his skill set means he will always be better suited to be a star player, which typically doesn't tend to be the shot caller overall. Exceptions like Faker, the greatest player to ever play the game, so a bit of an outlier if you ask me. I think you can teach people the qualities, but I think a lot more of it's about the experiences you went through in your life, and that's why when you have a good leader, I consider them worth their weight in gold. Like, in my opinion, these types of leaders are the most thin on the ground in every esports game, and by the way, in every sport. There are a lot of people in traditional sports who end up fitting in for the captain of the team, and they're like a savvy veteran I always bring up who's had life experience. They're just helping supplement what the captain does. There's not many captains who are godlike guys like that, some Tom Brady motherfucker who's going to make you believe in him. There actually really aren't that many people. There's a lot of great quarterbacks, not that many that are great leaders in that sense though. So I would just say, I think generally that's part of the problem. In the NA scene, I think they've had some of these players. I think the issue has just been that they're growing up in a culture that worships money, that tells you fame is success, that the two things are blurred lines together. You don't pursue greatness first and foremost, and so people don't take on the hard roles. People don't take on the roles that'll get you criticised, that'll limit your own individual game, but maybe help the team, because why the fuck am I going to help those guys? We're all selfish, we're all competing for ourselves, right? We're all being famous, we're all seeing what our KDA is like this game. There are a million reasons that apply to them that don't generally apply to the Korean scene, which I think makes logical sense as to why you haven't had that many great Western captains generally. Even so, still thin on the ground in Korea though, quite frankly. Maybe this is going to be split into two, actually. Maybe that's one of the ways I'll make up for this, because this is a fucking long one. This is some of the most questions, maybe because I left it for so long. Brian B says, this question... Right, here's the interesting one. So this is a question that is now outdated. He basically says, in a world in which basically one of the top teams, Astralis Navi, wins the title. What if we did a swap? And he imagines a swap between MIBR and Liquid. Now, obviously, it did happen, but it was different from this. He wanted to do, funnily enough, this is months before the move actually happened. He wanted to do Taco and Zeus in exchange for YNK and Stewie 2K, so similar to the move that happened. But he also wants to change OllieJ to MIBR and Tarek to Liquid. So he's getting all the Americans onto Liquid. He's bringing an American to MIBR. But OllieJ, the reason why is he, in theory, can speak some Portuguese. He's now even got a Portuguese girlfriend, which, by the way, is a Brazilian girlfriend who speaks Portuguese. By the way, one of the best ways to learn a foreign language, because if you're literally getting positive feedback from a sexy woman as you learn their language, that's a fucking great way to pin it in your brain. I can tell you from past experience when I was in Korea. So he's put for Taco, goes back to working with Cold Zero. Yep, great reason. Zeus, motivation / structure more than tactics. Yeah, to some degree. Liquid, he's put YNK, they get new tactics and mindset. I would have agreed, but YNK, as far as I know, didn't want to stay in North America and obviously got the phase offer. Stewie 2K shares the AWP with Nitro needed, sure, to some degree. Tarek can help Nitro with mid-round calls. I actually like the part of the offer that obviously didn't happen, which is the OllieJ for Tarek part, because on the one hand, obviously, you would have a fucking very sick skill-wise team in Team Liquid, but it might even work role-wise. Like, I could see a world in which Tarek can help with the calls and shore up Nitro. Tarek wasn't a terrible in-game leader. He just did the more scrimmy style. Nitro's done a bit more tactical style. What a great pairing that could be. And Tarek's a very good individual player when you give him the right spots. So I think that's an interesting mix there. The OllieJ one's not as crazy as it sounds, because first of all, he actually seems like he could get better at Portuguese. I think he'd be very motivated to do it. He's a very intelligent guy. Secondly, you've got the angle that we think of the sort of player he is. He's played entry. He's played a little bit more stationary. He's played as a star. He's played as more of a facilitative component. He's someone who has amazing spray. So with all the aggressive players they've got in their team, it's a different angle to that. He's someone who has a hunger to succeed still. I think that's a pretty good sign for them. He wouldn't have a lot of the attitude problems because he's not as outspoken as a lot of the Brazilian players that they wouldn't pick up. I even think that's a pretty interesting move. I don't know if I like it as much as the current MIBR lineup, but I like both those moves for both teams, actually. I think there's something to them. So I would have preferred that move maybe to what they actually did overall. Right, we'll do one more question and then I'll split the other one into a second one. Do you think that the drama before Snappy and Yugi joined Optic CSGO team influenced the way things went for them, in that the negative atmosphere that must have existed between Gade and the other two due to their attempt to kick him and the fact they swapped an unproven IGL, managing top pros, with another unproven, one may have done nothing to appease the situation, even not considering Snappy's personal skill set as captain / IGL. If that is the case, would it have been better to break even further the team before the two players from Heroic come into the equation? Listen, guys, as a general rule, if you want, just restructure the question. Give all that, like, make your question at the top and then say, here's what I think should happen. Because you've done that thing again that a lot of people I've noticed do, where it's like, it seems like you just want me to confirm all of your ideas. Like, do you want to actually know my ideas in any of this? Because you've basically asked the question in a way where if I follow your question, I have to address all of your points. And in fact, some of them are set up so that, like, you're even giving me either ors that I almost have to say. So I'm going to go ahead personally and say, I'm going to ignore a lot of that. What I would say is this. I don't think it really had anything to do with any of it. Like, luckily, since Gade was the only player staying, I actually think that in Gade's case, since he was a nobody before that, he came from North Academy, I think beggars can't be choosers, and he probably still tried just as hard, probably reset his mentality, and didn't worry about it too much. Like, there are plenty more players than Gade who know the rumours behind the scenes that people have tried to cut him. I've said this in the past. Oscar from Mouse Sports, famously, Zipniks from TSM. There have been many players where they know they're on the chopping block, or even that moves have been made to trade them. Just like in traditional sports, someone's on the trade block and he doesn't get traded. If you're a professional, you just swallow it and you get on with it. And if you're a player who's doing badly or you're lower down the hierarchy, you have to get on with it. Beggars can't be choosers. If you resent those players, they will kick you out, you will play worse, and you'll just sabotage your own career. That's why that angle never made sense when morons were like, but if you tell a star player to stay, he might just start playing worse. Well, then he'll fuck his own career. I'll out that he did that and I'll fuck his career entirely. Good job, you're an idiot who ruined everyone's career. Like, there's so many easy ways to break that down. So what I would say is this. I certainly don't think it helps that Snappy was the in-game leader they brought in. If they'd have brought in an MSL, I could have seen that helping them. I don't think that helped overall. I don't know that it's Snappy's fault. He's actually done a pretty good job generally bringing in newer talents. I mean, a bit hit and miss by the time he got to the end of Heroic, but at that point in time, he didn't have as much choice. He'd had a lot of his good players taken. I don't know that I necessarily put it all on Snappy. No, I think that doesn't particularly matter, quite frankly. And I don't think the heroic aspect's really that big a deal. Yeah, that can be the last question. I'll do another one where I do the other half of these, and we'll get caught up soon enough, and there will be those opportunities to ask those questions if you are indeed a donator on my Patreon. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, Tristan Jones, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for upcoming content of mine? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want some teasers to see who the next guests are for my talk shows, for my interviews? Maybe you'd like to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.